The wind started screaming across the empty Wyoming highway long before she realized. The storm wasn't just another passing squall, but a white wall swallowing everything in its path. A wall she could no longer outrun. Marin's hands tightened on the steering. Wheel of snowflakes the size of dimes slapped against the windshield like frantic fingers, trying to claw their way inside. She had driven through storms before, but nothing like this. Nothing so sudden and vicious that it felt as though the sky itself wanted to bury her alive. One moment she was rolling under a stretch of moonlit cloudbreak, and the next she was caught in a blinding vortex where all sense of direction vanished. Her tires skidded on a patch of invisible ice. The car fishtailed, and she bit down on a scream as the headlights swung wildly across the endless drifts. When the car slid to a dead stop, shuddering like a frightened animal, she realized she had no idea where she was anymore. Her phone had no signal. Her engine coughed like it wanted to die. Panic pressed cold hands around her throat. She couldn't stay in the car. She knew that from too many tragic winter stories. She grabbed her coat and stumbled out into the storm, snow instantly filling her boots as night swallowed her whole. She forced herself forward, barely able to see a foot ahead, thinking she was walking toward a distant glow she'd glimpsed earlier, but unsure if it was real or just her terrified imagination. Minutes or hours later, time lost meaning in the blizzard. She made out the faint outline of a wooden fence, then a small gate hanging crookedly, then the blurred silhouette of a sprawling ranch house with a single porch light flickering like a wavering heartbeat. She staggered toward it, numb and shaking. She didn't knock. She didn't have the strength. She simply collapsed against the door just as it swung open. A tall man stood in the doorway holding a lantern and a shotgun, but her frozen vision only registered the light reflecting off his startled eyes. He lowered the gun instantly when she collapsed forward, mumbling something about her car. The storm, the cold swallowing her. Strong arms caught her before she hit the floor. The warmth of his body, even through her coat, felt like a shock. The last thing she heard before darkness swallowed her was a deep voice shouting for someone to bring blankets, a voice edged with urgency and something she couldn't name. When she woke hours later on a couch near a crackling fire, wrapped in quilts that smelled faintly of cedar and cinnamon, she thought she might be dreaming. But then she heard footsteps, small ones, then whispers, then a gasp as two children peeked over the arm of the couch as though she were some mysterious creature washed in by the storm. A girl with dark braids blinked at her with wide-eyed curiosity, while a boy clutching a stuffed elk looked ready to bolt yet too fascinated to move. Behind them stood the man from the doorway, tall, broad-shouldered, face shadowed by stubble and exhaustion, but eyes watchful and unexpectedly gentle. He introduced himself as Cal. Just Cal. He asked if she was hurt, if she could sit up, if she remembered anything past the storm. She told him her name, her voice rasping like she hadn't spoken in days. The children stared at her as though expecting her to reveal wings or a glowing aura. Cal explained that the storm had knocked out power for miles, that the roads were closed, that no one was getting out until the blizzard passed. Marin nodded numbly, trying not to panic again. She had been headed to Jackson for Christmas, hoping to outrun painful memories of last year, but fate or weather or something more sinister had thrown her onto a stranger's porch instead. Cal made her tea. The children watched her drink it like it was part of some ritual. The girl whispered that she looked like a snow angel, but not the peaceful kind. The boy asked if she was running from someone. Cal hushed them, but his gaze lingered on her just a second too long, as though he wondered the same. When thunder cracked outside, rare, in a snowstorm, Cal muttered something under his breath and glanced toward the barn. Marin had no idea why that single noise made him look so uneasy. She would only understand later, when everything else began unraveling like an old rope under too much strain. For now, all she could do was listen to the storm hammering the ranch like it wanted to break in and finish what it started. Cal offered her the spare bedroom. The children didn't want her to go, crowding her legs as she walked down the hall. Their little hands clung to her coat as though she were a lifeline they didn't even know they needed. Cal looked almost embarrassed as he pried them off her gently. She whispered goodnight, but inside she felt a flicker of dread she couldn't explain. Something about the house seemed too quiet beneath the storm's violent roar, like the walls were holding secrets that had been waiting for someone new to enter. She lay awake for hours, staring at the ceiling, listening to the wind shriek across the glass. At one point she could have sworn she heard footsteps outside her window. Slow, crunching, deliberate. When she looked, there was only darkness. But the sense of being watched didn't leave her. It grew heavier. Cal avoided her eyes more than once the next morning. The children kept staring at her as though waiting for her to reveal something she didn't even know about herself. And the storm only grew worse, trapping them together in the middle of nowhere. She had no idea then how much danger she was in, or how deeply the ranch's shadows were tied to Cal, or that she hadn't stumbled onto the porch by accident. It would take the children begging their father to make her stay, whispering things they shouldn't have known, for her to understand that she might never have been meant to leave at all. The storm eased only slightly on the second day, just enough for daylight to expose the ranch in ways Maren hadn't noticed through last night's fear-blurred haze. She stood at the frosted kitchen window, staring out at the stretch of snow-covered land that seemed to go on forever, disappearing into the pale horizon. There were fences, a massive barn with a sagging roof, a few sheds leaning like tired sentinels, and what looked like old tire tracks, leading toward the tree, line before abruptly vanishing. Cal had made breakfast, though he barely said a word while he cooked, moving like a man carrying more weight than the storm outside. The children, Emma and Luke, sat at the table drawing pictures, but every few seconds they peeked up at Maren, their eyes bright with a strange intensity for kids their age. When she approached, they smiled with a mixture of adoration and something like relief, as though her presence meant they were safer. "Daddy said you're staying until the storm ends," Emma chirped. "But we want you to stay longer." Maren blinked, unsure how to respond. Kids got attached easily, she reminded herself, especially kids isolated out here. Still, the way Emma said it with certainty instead of hope sent a small chill up her spine. Cal stiffened but said nothing. When Maren stepped outside later to get some fresh air, the storm's bitter edge reminded her immediately that she wasn't welcome beyond the porch. Snowdrifts rose up to her knees. The wind sliced through her coat. She turned back quickly, only to find Cal standing behind her, face unreadable. "Don't go near the tree line," he said. His voice wasn't stern so much as haunted. She nodded slowly. She wasn't planning to wander anywhere, but the warning planted a seed of unease she couldn't shake. After lunch, when Cal headed to the barn to check on the generator and livestock, Maren offered to help. The children clung to her legs again, begging her not to go outside. She thought it was just fear of the storm, but their little faces were pale and tense in a way that made her stomach twist. They begged Cal too, grabbing his coat, pleading with him not to leave them alone in the house. Cal pried their arms away again, gentler this time, brushing Emma's hair back from her face with a trembling hand. "I'll be quick," he said. "Stay with Maren." But the moment he stepped outside, Luke whispered, "Don't let Daddy go out there alone." Maren crouched down, trying to reassure him, but Luke's eyes were fixed on the barn, his expression far too serious for a 4-year-old. "It comes when the wind stops screaming," he murmured. "That's when it listens." Maren's breath caught. "What listens?" He didn't answer. He just pressed his face into her shoulder, shaking. She didn't know what terrified her more, his words, or the absolute certainty in them. Minutes dragged into nearly an hour before Cal returned, covered in snow, his jaw set in a tight line. He mumbled something about tracks near the barn that hadn't been there earlier. Maren asked if the generator was working. He nodded, but he looked like a man wrestling with a decision he didn't want to make. That night the ranch fell silent in a way that felt unnatural, like the storm itself was, holding its breath. Even the wind quieted to a low moan, the kind of quiet that made Luke's warning echo in her head until she felt sick. The children refused to sleep in their rooms, insisting they needed to stay where Maren could see them. Cal argued, but when Emma burst into tears, he gave up, his shoulders slumping as though he'd been fighting that battle a long time before she ever arrived. They set up blankets in the living room. The fire crackled weakly. Cal sat in an old chair across from them, staring into the flames like they were speaking to him. Maren lay awake long after the kids drifted off, studying him. He wasn't just tired. He was frightened. Truly, deeply frightened. She opened her mouth to ask him about it. But before she could speak, the generators hiccuped outside, one sharp stutter that made the lights flicker, then another. Then the power cut out entirely. The fire was the only glow left. Emma whimpered in her sleep, Luke sat up suddenly, eyes wide, staring at the window. "It's listening," he whispered. Cal stood fast, faster than a tired man should have been able to move, reaching for a flashlight and the shotgun by the door. "Stay with the kids," he told Marin. "Do not open that door for any reason." "Cal, what's happening?" she whispered. He hesitated just a fraction, but it was enough for her to see the truth. He was choosing whether to lie or confess. He settled on something in between. "There's something out here that shouldn't be," he said. "It's been coming around since last winter. I don't know why yet." Marin felt her pulse hammering against her ribs. "Something what?" "Just keep the kids close." Then he stepped into the darkness. The moment the door shut, the house fell into suffocating stillness. Marin held both children as they trembled, staring toward the window where frost slowly crept across the glass in delicate, unnatural patterns almost like fingerprints. She squeezed her eyes shut, refusing to look. The minutes crawled by. The fire sputtered again. The silence grew heavier. Then footsteps, not light, not careful, heavy, slow, crunching across the snow, coming closer, stopping right outside the door. Marin's breath froze in her throat. Luke shook violently in her arms. Emma buried her face in her chest. Something brushed the door. A whisper followed, so faint she thought she imagined it, until she realized the children heard it too, because they both lifted their heads at the same time, faces pale with terror. The whisper came again, just a hair louder. A voice that wasn't a voice. A sound that wasn't a sound. Like something trying to mimic human speech and failing. Marin covered the children's ears and held her breath until she saw shadows move past the window and drift toward the barn. She didn't know how long it was before Cal finally returned, but when he did, he looked shaken and furious and more relieved than any man had a right to be. He set the shotgun down with trembling hands. She asked what he saw. He didn't answer. He simply looked at her, with such raw intensity that she stopped, breathing for a moment. "You should have left before the storm," he said quietly. "It's too late now." But even then she didn't understand, not fully, not until the children clung to her again, begging their father to make her stay, repeating words that chilled her to the bone. "She keeps the shadows away," Emma whispered. "She makes them quieter." Luke nodded, eyes wide and unblinking. "Don't let her go, Daddy. If she leaves, it'll come into the house." Cal stared at his children, then at Marin, something like horror dawning behind his eyes, as though he realized in that moment that the storm hadn't stranded her here by accident, that whatever had been haunting his ranch for the past year since the night his wife vanished, without a trace, had quieted the moment Marin stepped through the door. And now it wanted her too.